Hi, Father Ian Van Heusen here. So what I want to get into is a commentary on St. Alphonsus Ligouri's Moral Theology. We're dealing with this first section on conscience. And before I get into it, I want to kind of talk a little bit about a story. When I was first in seminary, and we were touring the city. So we had gone on a tour. It was my first week of seminary. And we were downtown Philadelphia. And on the side of the street was a couple of drug addicts that were kind of, in my perception and my individual conscience, that's what we're going to find to be talking about, I felt that they were in need. Now, the other seminarians that I was with and the leaders said, well, we need to focus on finishing the tour and going back to seminary. We don't necessarily need to take care of these individual people. And so I slightly disagreed and persisted in it and tried to give them some food, and it didn't completely go great. I'm not even sure if I was right or wrong in that individual circumstance, which I think is part of the key. Now I'm starting to realize with this sense of circumstances. That's what I'm going to say is there's some key principles I want people to keep in mind. As I've delved into casuistry, I've delved into St. Alphonsus Ligouri, is I would say one of the key insights I've learned from St. Alphonsus Ligouri is the sense of recognizing circumstances, that circumstances are tricky and weighing circumstances. Also the sense of mystery. I think a lot of this teaching, while there's clarity to it, it also allows us to be more patient and to recognize the role of mystery and on this side of eternity. So when we're trying to weigh what we should do, or when we're even looking at other people and trying to discern or judge their actions or try to understand why they do what they do, these teachings help us to be awakened to the sense of mystery. So in my particular case, I went with my conscience. I went and helped the people. I did get a little bit in trouble. It wasn't really a big deal, but I got a talking to. And I will say to this day, I don't know if there's actually a clear right or wrong. I don't think it's as clear as either it was in my mind or it was in the role of an authority. I think that's often the challenge with a lot of ambiguous cases when it comes to the spiritual life, when it comes to the moral life. So let's dive into it and kind of have this in the background, the sense of mystery and the sense of circumstances. So, the first part, so it goes Book 1, Treatise on Conscience, page 24. There is a twofold rule of human acts. One is called remote and the second proximate. The remote or material is the divine law, while the proximate or formal is the conscience. So this is an important concept. So the divine law, positive law, or just law in general, when we can classify all of it, is more remote. It's not tied with individual circumstances. The interpretation in the life of an individual of the law in a particular circumstance is the role of the conscience. The conscience interprets the law in that particular circumstance. So although conscience ought to conform to the divine law in all things, nevertheless, the goodness or malice of human actions are known to us inasmuch as is apprehended by the conscience itself. So goodness and evil is actually less so in the abstract law, but how that's interpreted in concrete circumstances. All right. Inasmuch as apprehended by the conscience itself. St. Thomas teaches, human reason is the rule of human will, which measures its goodness. And more clearly in another place, a human act is judged virtuous or vicious, according to the good perception in which the will is imposed, and not according to the material object of the act. Now, I think one of the obvious objections a lot of people are going to have is right now, I think this, in the modern context, in the modern Catholic Church, this teaching is distorted in a particular way, which is, live according to your conscience. And there's almost like they've divorced this idea of conscience from what he calls the material object of the act. So there's the object of the act, there's the intent, and then there's the circumstances. I think that's a stretch to say that's exactly what he's teaching in this particular section. I just don't think it's... I got to flesh it out a little bit. I'm actually going to ask a little bit more about this. But that idea is much more of a modern concept. So sometimes we hear these ideas, but I think it would be clear is that often we're judged according to how do we act on our conscience. But he also gets into later having a correct conscience and a conscience that conforms to the divine law. So first we will treat, and we're going to be fleshing out this commentary on St. Alphonsus Ligouri. We will treat the proximate rule, namely on conscience, and then the remote rule, namely on laws. So he's going to, another part of this work, and it's a big work, he's going to deal with laws and what constitutes laws and the promulgation of laws and things around that particular section. So the important thing, I think, is also right now some preliminary things. So we're going to flesh this out in future commentaries as we dive more into St. Alphonsus Ligouri. Some preliminary things that will help us to have a sense of mystery and understanding circumstances. Now let's deal with a case like I was dealing with the helping the homeless person. Let's deal with a case where it is somewhat ambiguous, where it's not clear that there's a clear right or wrong. And there's a question of how to interpret the law or interpret abstract concepts in individual circumstances. The person is judged according to whether they act according to their conscience. That's an important quality. And it helps us to awaken a sense of mystery that in some of those ambiguous cases, people are trying their best. And that should help us to be more patient and understanding and loving and to really appreciate this and to cultivate that awareness. So let's continue on. Conscience is so defined. It is a judgment or practical command of reason in which we judge something must be done here and now as good or something must be avoided as evil. Moreover, conscience is called a practical command, in distinction from synderesis, which is the speculative knowledge of universal principles to live well. Certainly, that God must be worshipped. You do not do to another what you do not wish for yourself, as St. Thomas holds. So there's an idea of synderesis that St. Thomas Aquinas is that we have a kind of knowledge of broad universal principles by a kind of intuition, a primary intuition. That's a little bit different than the kind of intuition that is conscience, which is conscience is more an intuition in individual circumstances, practical, immediate. So we're going to kind of be fleshing this out. I hope that was helpful in this first section, but just kind of meditating on that. Again, allow this to lead you to prayer, to the relationship with the Lord. I know in a lot of ways I kind of discussed a lot of abstract technical jargon, but really what it should allow you to do is open your heart to mystery and to the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. Lead you to prayer and intimacy with Jesus Christ, because that's the difference between sound theology and just speculative, religious studies. Is theology is actually relational. It's hopefully opening us to the work of the Holy Spirit. And I think in this particular case, it helps us to build empathy with people, that we're aware that there's a mysterious element of the human heart.